Coming to you, not live from a suburb that is probably pretty far from you, this is the Movie Nerd Podcast, the show where myself, Dominic Rizzi, aka the Movie Nerd, and my co-host, Christian Evanko, we will continue the discussion about movies, TV shows, and just life in general. And so without further ado, here we are, the hosts, myself, Dominic Rizzi, and Christian Evanko. This is the Movie Nerd Podcast. How's it going, Chris?
Pretty good, Dom. How are you, man?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty excited to get this going. I've always wanted to do a podcast of my own. I've always wanted to, reach out into other enterprises, like besides just filming myself for YouTube. And I figured a podcast would be something cool to try out. So
yeah, I mean, for me, and this is kind of the way I've always thought of podcasts, because I recently just got into them this year. I mean, obviously, it's entertaining, but it's super free form, and it's kind of just more of like the abstract form of radio, and that's why I think it's really cool, because you can elaborate so much more on a specific topic, which is what we plan to do here about movies. Am I right?
Exactly.
Cool.
I love that podcasts, how they can be both so professional and they can feel so relaxed. Like, it's just really a conversation is really what it is.
Yeah, it's very personal.
Exactly. I love that. So basically, here's how this first show is going to work. In this first show, we were going to talk about a movie that came out this weekend, Chris. Pretty big one.
Not really sure I know what you're talking about.
Really? Well, that movie was... That movie was Rogue One, a Star Wars story. It crushed the box office. It is the next installment from Disney, or as I like to call them, the evil empire that owns all of our lives, because let's face it, Disney, they own Marvel. They own Pixar. They have their own Disney animation, which they've been doing ever since they got started well over like 70, 80 years ago, back in the 20s and 30s with Walt Disney, the man himself. You're talking
like for people who are a little bit unfamiliar with the
classic
Disney,
Disney. Exactly.
Lion King, Snow White.
Exactly. Like, they've been doing that for years. Snow White, if you want to go even more classic, Snow White was the first ever animated film that they did. And now they own Lucasfilm, which they purchased back in 2012 from the man George Lucas himself. Mm-hmm. And now, thanks to that, we are not only getting 3 more saga films, continuing and ultimately wrapping up George Lucas's vision from the beginning, which is with the original 3 Star Wars movies. He wanted to, in addition, create 3 movies that were set before those Star Wars movies. We got those with the prequels. And now he also wanted to make 3 movies that took place after those original Star Wars movies. And we are getting that. But now, in addition, in order to keep that money-making trend going, because the Star Wars logo is such this international phenomenon, they are now, in between each one of the saga films, they're doing this anthology film that follows a side story that could follow either a set of characters that we know just from a different time period that we haven't seen, which is the case of the Han Solo film that we're getting in 2018, directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller. And then you've got the case of situations like this movie, Rogue One, which is where it follows a completely new set of characters that simply tie into the story. And so we're going to get into Rogue One. We're going to break down what this film is about. There are going to be some heavy spoilers here, so if you guys have not seen the movie, I wouldn't recommend listening to this segment of the show. So
we can want to maybe give them a spoiler-free, like 5-6 minute recap
we can go
of our thoughts and our feelings about it, being fans of Star Wars.
Yeah, that's good.
I assume you were a fan since you were a young kid, just like me.
Of course.
So we can give them we can give them the feel of the movie without giving it all away. And then when we get to the point we eventually have to reach, we'll be like, okay, now it's time for a spoiler. So if you're hearing this, you're still in the safe zone, but just be prepared to listen to our cues for when you have to tune out.
All right, so this is officially the spoiler-free version. So my thoughts going into this film were, I was pretty disappointed with the overall blockbuster, the amount of blockbusters that come out this year, because I felt like after Captain America Civil War, I felt like every major summer blockbuster that I felt that I was looking forward to over the summer disappointed me.
That movie was wonderful.
Captain America Civil War was fantastic. Here's the problem though, because it came out at the beginning, it just set this trend, and then every other film, it was like a slippery slope. So the way that I saw it is that I saw Captain America Civil War first weekend of May. Then the weekend after that, I saw The Nice Guys, and I loved The Nice Guys. I thought it was one of the best films of the summer. It's one of my favorite films of the year. The only problem is that's more of an independent film. It's an original idea. It's from director Shane Black, so not a lot of people went to see that movie. Then the weekend after that, I saw X-Men Apocalypse. And X-Men Apocalypse was where it all began, because a lot of people thought that movie was okay. I officially hated that movie. So the point being, I was disappointed with the blockbusters of this summer. But so that tarnished my vision of Rogue One a little bit. However, going into it, I heard from almost every reviewer that I follow, oh my god, this movie is fantastic. This movie is Empire good. So I'm like, oh wow, this movie's got to have a specific brand.
That's my standards right there.
After coming out of it, here's what I have to say. I loved this movie. I gave the movie an 8 out of 10 when I first saw it. All the problems that people had, this is one of those situations similar to Godzilla back in 2014, which is ironic because Godzilla was also directed by the same guy who did this film, Gareth Edwards.
Oh, really?
He was, yeah.
Did he also do King Kong, or am I mistaken?
No, he is not doing King. Are you talking about the King Kong that's coming out next year? No, that is not directed by Gareth Edwards. That is actually directed by another independent director. His name is Jordan Vogt Roberts, the director of Kings of Summer. So, coming out of this film, I enjoyed it. I thought that it was fresh. I thought it was a new way to take a look at a franchise that we really become very familiar with. And then just the thing that I appreciate about this is that this didn't feel like a Star Wars film to me. And I know for a lot of people that can like sometimes take them out of it, but for me, I really appreciated the change of pace. Chris, what about you? What did you think of it?
Well, to that point, I definitely think it didn't feel like a Star Wars film, but then it so much did feel like a Star Wars film.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because you have like the captivating, playful universe. You're surrounded by rebels and stormtroopers, and the score, although slightly altered, and we'll get into that a little later on. That'll come in the spoilers territory of this podcast. But although slightly altered, it's still, and I saw the movie twice. So on the second rewatch, it definitely hit me harder than it did the first time around, and kind of helped to heal, in a way, some of my gripes that I actually had with it the first time through.
All right.
Because to be honest with you, I usually never give movies a 10 out of 10. But this is the first time I've given a movie a 10 out of 10 in like 6 years.
Really? You gave this movie a 10 out of 10? Because the first time you saw it, you told me it was a 9 out of 10.
Exactly. But that's because I wasn't comfortable with the score.
Okay.
And then so the second time around, I thought that the playful Star Wars moments that you get, being that there's droids all over the place. When you're in the Rebel base, everyone's working in the background. It's so A New Hope-esque. And is that Jedi when they're on Hoth?
No, that's Empire.
That's Empire, when they're on Hoth in the base, and everyone's working on their machines, and they're prepping to go into their X-Wings and go off to that final fight in the Death Star. And it's just so cool because one of the things I think I missed the most in Force Awakens was kind of like the goodies you get from all the extras, like helping to create the universe around you.
All right.
And I know that initial scene on the desert planet, what was the name of it?
Oh, in Force Awakens?
Force Awakens.
That was Jakku.
Jakku. They did a great job there, but then the rest of the movie was more so just like Rey alone. And yes, when they were on the base, was that Starkiller Base?
No, the third Death Stars I want to call it. Yeah, it was Starkiller Base.
And when they were on there, that was cool, but there was just so many barren, like, blank moments in that movie. And in the old movies, there's always so much going on in the background as far as like to make the universe. Like, it's felt like more so I was in a universe that I grew up loving.
Wow.
So, with that being said, I think that if you aren't a fan of Star Wars, you would enjoy this movie for what it is, a story, a little tiny tale. But if you are a fan of Star Wars, I think this is just a really playful way to sort of keep the palette going for something that you love, because December is now Star Wars season.
Yeah,
like,
it is.
In my mind,
like, I see those internet memes online. It's like a guy looking at a wall. It's just like it's counting down the days for December, and it's like, oh, what are you waiting for? Christmas is like, no, Star Wars.
Yeah, and in my mind now, I associate everything like December wise as Star Wars. Like, it was subconscious. As December started and like 3 days in, I said, I want to pick a new show. I gravitated to Star Wars: The Clone Wars.
Oh,
and then
man.
I was like, you know what? I haven't read a comic in a while. I gravitated to the Obi-Wan Anakin comic strip. So in reality,
I still haven't read that. How is that?
Oh, that's awesome. And we can do an episode on comics too.
Right,
at some point down the
absolutely.
road. That'll be one of the many things we're going to get into here on the Movie Nerd podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'd say, can I give a final? I'm going to give a final statement, and then I'd say we can move into the spoiler territory.
Absolutely.
Because we're about 10 minutes in at this point. So what I would say is, for people who were iffy about this movie, since it's not a part of the trilogy, go and see it. The cast is wonderful. While it is an ensemble piece, Jyn Erso, right?
Jyn Erso.
She is the lead, but she doesn't overshadow the rest of them, and that was really cool to see. They really meshed well, considering this is like their first and possibly only time that they'll all be together in a set. I wish I had more of that, but what we got was so perfect. 10 out of 10 for me on my quick spoiler-free review. What about you? On
Just
the
to wrap it up in terms of the spoiler-free review, here's I agree with you a lot of things that I actually really appreciate that you're able to like bring in how the background and everything going on in the background makes you feel like a Star Wars, because the thing that I appreciated the most about this film is that you're right. If you are not a Star Wars fan, you will still be able to appreciate this film, because this film feels rather more than a Star Wars movie. It feels more like a war film set in the Star Wars film. In the Star Wars universe. As I stated in my review, I feel that there are real stakes. These are gritty characters. These are not black and white characters. Like, unfortunately, so the way that the Rebel Alliance, at least from my view, was portrayed in all the originals, they were very black and white characters. But in this one, they felt like real characters. Like when Cassian, her right-hand man, Diego Luna, shot that guy in the beginning. This is where we're getting into a little bit of spoiler territory.
So is it now safe to just say this is the jump?
This is pretty much the jump, yeah.
So just real quick, give them your rating for those who haven't seen
this movie, now granted, I've only seen it once, so I gave it an 8 out of 10 on my first viewing. I have to go and see it a second time, but I disagree with you on the score. I think the score was very, very disappointing. I think that coming from Giacchino, the guy who did the score for Lost, the guy who did the score for just so many different things. Doctor Strange, exactly. I just felt like this was this was just a bland, generic sci-fi score. This did not feel like a Star Wars score to me. Also, another thing that I think this movie suffered from, lack of an opening crawl. I think that out of all the movies that needed a crawl, this one needed it the most, because people, at least in terms of the advertising, still were very unsure of when this movie takes place chronologically, and were unaware. It's like, oh wait, this isn't episode 8. Like, that's not Rey when they first saw them.
Right.
Like, people weren't as specific on that, and the advertising, I feel like, didn't do a good enough job explaining this is not episode 8. This is a new thing. That's literally the only gripes that I had with it, though.
Right, and I've heard things that this is 30 years after A New Hope. Or before A New Hope, or this is 15 minutes before A New Hope, and we're going to get into spoiler territory right now. So this is the jump-off point. Thanks for listening, and when you watch the movie, be sure to come back and start it up again from the spot.
Absolutely.
So I've heard that, getting back into it, I've heard that this was either 15 minutes or 30 years.
So basically, the way that this film ends is this film literally ends about 5 minutes before A New Hope starts. So basically, like I said, we get to the ending, you see the plans being handed off to Princess Leia, and you see Tantive 4 take off, and you know exactly where it's going, because for all those fans of A New Hope, it comes right up to Tatooine, and A New Hope starts off. And I actually really appreciated that. I thought that because of how the film had been built up to this point, I thought that because of the pacing and because of the storytelling, I thought that it flowed so well into it. And so now this is where this film in particular starts to show some of my gripes that I had with The Force Awakens.
Hold on real quick, to that point of being confused where it starts and stops. You kind of don't get it until the very end, where you have that nostalgic sort of play to the whole Darth Vader boarding
exactly. And we'll get to the Vader, and we'll get to the Vader scene and how he's using this film later, because like that scene is like a scene on its own, because holy shit, that scene.
Right, but I think like the timeline for me wasn't 100%. Like I didn't fully feel. I guess I didn't fully feel locked in on this movie, like as far as like where it takes place in the classic Star Wars timeline with the 2 trilogies and whatnot.
Right, exactly.
I didn't feel locked in until the very end, when he's on the ship and he says, take her hostage but keep her alive, something along the lines of that.
Right, exactly.
Because then I knew, oh, okay, so this like literally is the start of A New Hope.
Pretty much.
But the whole movie I was like, is this before? Is this after? I had never heard of these planets. Why did they not reference that these cities had just gotten blown up in A New Hope, if that happened?
Well, here's the thing.
You know, they know it's devastating now. Those were the same rebels that were fighting the Empire, so it just was very confusing until the very end.
Well, here's the thing about this film, at least that made it easy for me to understand, is like, look, this film, it's going to be about them stealing the Death Star plan, so I knew from the very start, when I heard about this movie, this film is going to take place into right before A New Hope, because at least where Rebels takes place, which Rebels is in the universe, Rebels takes place about 5 years before A New Hope. So Rebels is, so basically here in the timeline, if we're talking, so you've got Revenge of the Sith, then you've got that extended period of time where Vader like went and wiped out all the Jedi, and then you've got Rebels, which is about 5 years before A New Hope, and then you've got Rogue One. What I didn't know though is how Rogue One's ending would incorporate into A New Hope, and honestly, when it was revealed that the film ended about 5 minutes before A New Hope, it made me ecstatic. So I knew going into it that it was going to be before A New Hope. It was just a matter of when and how it would lead into A New Hope was what I was unsure of.
Obviously, I knew that it was the precursor to A New Hope, but I just felt like they could have done And maybe they wanted to give you this mystery because then again, it was kind of a cool reveal at the end when I was sort of like reflecting on it right now. When I was sort of like, oh, this is literally A New Hope starts like 5 minutes down the road when Vader just walks a little bit further into the spaceship and finds Leia.
And honestly, that was the part that I really appreciated because when incorporating it into A New Hope, this film ended up actually strengthening a lot of the plot holes that A New Hope ends up having. Like, honestly, you understand why Vader is as pissed as he is when he walks onto that ship the first time in A New Hope. Because, honestly, when you see him for the first time in A New Hope, he's a little bit classy, he's a little bit more refined. He's choking out this guy, the captain of the Tantive 4 for...
Are you talking about
A New Hope? I'm talking A New Hope right
okay.
now. So in the beginning of A New Hope...
Sequence?
Exactly. In that intro sequence when the stormtroopers are blasting their way in and Vader walks in and you see him for the first time when he's choking out that guy and he's like, where are those plans? And you don't understand how pissed he is. After seeing the ending of Rogue One and how that incorporates into the beginning, it makes so much more sense how pissed he is because literally they let this ragtag band of rebels get into one of their most closely protected bases and escape with the plans to their ultimate death weapon, the weapon that will ultimately allow the Empire to continue their reign of terror on the galaxy, and these rebels got away with it. He's pissed!
Yeah, fairly easily, too,
fairly easily. Well, if we're talking about a guy named Orson Krennic, which we'll get into later...
Have you heard that funny story about the person who literally walked into the White House door?
No, I didn't.
He had a gun on him, and he literally walked into the White House and got down like 4 or 5 hallways before someone had finally realized, hey, we have an intruder. This was about a year ago it happened, and there was only one security guard at the front door. So it's kind of just like you have the most important thing in your empire, and you're going to leave it that unguarded to the point where it's just that easy to get into.
Right.
Which obviously sets up the whole story, because if it was hard to get in, who's to say they would have ever done it. But I honestly would have liked a little bit more of a struggle. I mean, he literally just said, this is, cargo ship, and we got rerouted, and they're like, okay,
well, here's the thing, though, is that this movie, in addition to being when it takes place chronologically, there are obviously a lot of references and a lot of points of this movie, and this is a reason why I feel like diehard Star Wars fans are going to appreciate this movie a little bit more than average moviegoers, is there is a lot of nostalgia, even more so than The Force Awakens, I would say, and there are a lot more references in this film, that more so to the extended universe, like the novels, that all the guys that are into the extended universe that regular fans who've only seen the movies wouldn't necessarily know about. So this actually leads into a different point of the film that I like that not a lot of people like, which is the inclusion of Peter Cushing's character, Grand Moff Tarkin, in this film. They CGI the now unfortunately deceased Peter Cushing's face onto a body double in order to have him provide the interaction between him and Director Krennic, portrayed by Ben Mendelsohn in the film, who I think did a great job, but I thought that his character could have been a little bit well written. And in terms of people saying, oh, why did he need to be in the film? And people say an explanation, oh, well, if you read the book Star Wars Catalyst that takes place shortly before this, that shows you the political strife. I both agree and disagree with some of those statements. But first, I want to hear your thoughts. Chris, what did you think of the inclusion of the CGI, both not just Grand Moff Tarkin, but also the CGI Leia at the end? What did you think of the inclusion of those characters?
Awesome, because I was actually going to ask you what you thought about that as well. So I'm glad you think that. So basically, I didn't mind it. To be honest with you, my first watch through, I didn't even notice it.
Right.
Well, the Leia one was pretty obvious.
The Leia one was pretty obvious, but that was only like 2 seconds. And like that, I could tell they didn't have as much time because I know that for the third act, remember those reshoots that we heard about that was going on in the movie?
Yeah.
Well, that third act was where a lot of the reshoots came in, and so I can understand why they wouldn't have had as much time to put in CGI Leia, especially because she didn't have like as big a part in the film. Like she was only there for 2 seconds. But at least with Tarkin, what I thought is that, first off, I had no problem with the CGI. I thought the CGI was done flawlessly, and it just goes to show how far the motion capture has come. And they've been doing it for years now, like bringing back deceased stars and putting them in films. Like they did a couple of years ago with Marilyn Monroe. She was in a perfume commercial that Charlize Theron was in, along with 2 other stars. And when they use archive footage of Laurence Olivier for Sky Captain of the World of Tomorrow, like they've been doing it for a while. And like in terms of actors that died in the middle of their productions and they had to keep going, like, you know, with Oliver Reed for Gladiator or Paul Walker with Furious 7, I really actually appreciated the motion capture, and I appreciated the inclusion of Tarkin in this film even more so than Vader, because even more so than Vader, Tarkin is needed to show he's not just there like to just say, oh, remember this guy from the original Star Wars. He is there to show you what the political machinations of the Empire are, and how the Empire is not this big, massive machine similar to the Rebel Alliance that we have all thought it was previously. You needed Tarkin there to show that political strife that going on between him and Krennic, because you can see Krennic is trying to make his way up the ranks by having just built this massive death machine, and then Tarkin comes in and swoops it out of them. I thought that was needed to show like the foils of the Empire, and I really appreciated how it was portrayed.
Right. So. Yeah, that's pretty much, I 100% agree with that. Let me hit you with 2 points here.
Right.
One, as a little kid, watching these movies my first time around 8, 9, and 10, I never really understood the role that Tarkin played. He was just kind of the old angry guy that Vader was sort of like picking up and force choking along with the rest of them.
Right.
And so I didn't really understand how much power the generals actually had.
Right.
Because it's really
in
not
this case Governor, though, because he's Governor Tarkin.
Governor, yeah.
Right.
But you really come to find out that it's not really the Darth Vader Palpatine show.
Exactly.
Like you thought
it really
was.
isn't.
And so that's,
really isn't.
For me, this movie with the role that Tarkin played, even though he wasn't there, but I think, again, to go back to the CGI point, I think the cleverness of CGIing the face so smoothly with having the body double walk and go through the motions made it 100% feel real, because if you notice, there's one scene where, I forget the guy in the white cape's name.
Oh, his name is Orson Krennic.
Orson Krennic.
Director Krennic, that's his name.
He walks right by him. Yeah, Director Krennic walks right by him, and Tarkin kind of goes straight, and he has to, like, dodge out of the way. Super fluent and awesome. And I was like, wow, you know what? Very smart. I didn't realize you could even do that. So the fact that our technology there kind of makes it feel like we're in a galaxy far, far away at this point. But to the whole note that you just said about Tarkin, his involvement in this movie being so heavy, and you sort of kind of got to see in this movie more so than any other, unless you read the comics, because there are a lot of comics that really dive into the whole chain of command in the Empire. You really got to see how important these people were, and kind of how small Vader was compared to them. Because while he can force choke them and lift them up, Palpatine really doesn't trust him. He has sort of like his like level-headed non-force user generals and governors to sort of like control things. And so I thought that was really refreshing to see. And lastly, with the whole Leia thing, I didn't mind it. We saw in Force Awakens that Carrie Fisher can't really deliver lines well anymore.
No, she can't.
And so it was fine. Because it's just a little ode to... I thought it was for the older fans and for the people who like the movie, just to be like, oh, wow, now we're getting to the point of it. And so I thought it was all fine. And I thought, if anything, Rogue One makes me appreciate the original trilogy even more so now.
Exactly. And that's the thing that I really appreciated the most about this film, is that no prequel that I have ever seen, and I mean ever, has strengthened the films that have come before. At best, the prequels can stand on their own as great films, but I've never seen a prequel that strengthens the film that it comes before, and this film did that for me in spades. Now, Chris, I wanted to talk to you also a little bit more, not just about like the machinations. I also wanted to talk to you about the cast, because I felt like this movie on a lot of different assets could have been a disaster. And I thought that in terms of casting, they knocked it out of the park. I loved each and every single one of those characters. The standouts for me were the portrayals of Diego Luna as Cassian Andor, Donnie Yen as Chirrut Imwe, and Alan Tudyk as the droid K2SO. I loved each and every one of those guys. Those three were the standouts, but I also really enjoyed the Rebels and how they were included, and how each one of these characters, even though they unfortunately did end up biting it in the end, which we'll get into that a little bit later, because I had my suspicions about that. I really enjoyed how they were all fully fleshed out characters. Each and every single one of them had an arc from beginning to end. They all played their parts perfectly. They all felt so seamless. And the greatest thing that I enjoyed about them is the fact that they made the cause that they were fighting for feel real. So that when each and every one of those guys went out in the way they did, I could feel their sacrifice, and they all went out like true heroes, in my opinion. And that's really why I love this cast. And this is easily some of my favorite casting, some of my favorite Star Wars characters that I've ever seen. So that's just to start out that conversation.
Yeah, no, you raise a lot of good points. So let's see where to begin. The two lead roles.
Yep.
Phenomenal.
Really
Cassian
and Jyn, portrayed by Diego Luna and Felicity Jones.
Really cool. I did get a little nervous at the end there when they're holding hands and it looks like they're about to kiss, because I thought to myself, well, that's just Disney being Disney. There was no build up to this at all, but it was more so like a brotherhood. Hey, we're going out together, but we did something great here. And you know, I was a little upset before watching the movie, because they mentioned that these rebels died getting the plans, so obviously
Right.
we knew they weren't going to make it out
We
alive.
knew they weren't going to make it out alive, and that, in a sense, it was a matter of, it's just like, okay, look, even if somebody has even a shred of suggestion that these guys are going to make it out, I have a feeling, I knew they weren't going to make it out. So for me personally, it wasn't a matter of, oh, how are these guys making it out? It's like, okay, how are these guys going to go out? And I thought that in terms of, with the way their deaths almost suited their characters and how they, like, it's like each one of their characters and their motivations and how they had been built up, it's like they incorporated the deaths into their characters, like, so smoothly. So first off, K2SO. First off, I thought Alan Tudyk, as that droid, stole absolutely every single scene that he was in. I thought that was a great voice capture performance. I thought that was a great motion capture performance. He was an absolutely lovable character. In my opinion, he is now my favorite droid. Even more so than R2-D2 and C-3PO. I know, sacrilege, but he was truly, like, an exception to the rule.
His death hurt the most.
It did.
His death hurt the most.
Because here's the thing, is that he went out first, and I wasn't expecting him to go out first.
And he went out fighting so hard. He went out
fighting. It's just like all those stormtroopers are blasting him apart, but he knows that he has to hold the line. It's that hold the line moment. It's that hold the line that we've seen in Game of Thrones and we've seen in Saving Private Ryan. It's the thing that truly makes a sacrifice worth it, is he knows that he can't make it out of it. But the fact that he is willing to die for his friends, for his comrades, and the fact that he is willing to keep them shut in, to keep them safe, so that they can finish the mission, so that they can get their plan, so they can fight and continue the fight that their cause is so devoted to, that's what makes a sacrifice truly worth it. But it's not just K2SO. It's the way that Chirrut goes out. It's the way that Bodhi goes out. It's the way that Baze goes out. It's the way that every single one of these guys that we come to love over the course of one film, granted. These are not characters that we've gotten to know over the course of 4 or 5 films. These are characters we have known for just one film. And yet, when they go out, you still feel emotionally wrecked because of it.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, they all definitely hurt. And I'm terrible with names, and this is gonna happen as you guys get to know the podcast. I know the faces, I know what they said, I know what they did, but the names escape me. So please remind me before I make this next point. The monk, the sort
Chirrut.
of...
His name is Chirrut Imwe, and just to give you, his partner's Baze Malbus. Just to give you a little bit of backstory on them, they were the guardians of an ancient Jedi temple on the planet Jedha, where they were first found in the beginning. Okay, so basically, in the beginning of this film, Chirrut and Baze, when they first started out before this war, they were the guardians of this ancient Jedi temple on the planet Jedha, very on-the-nose name. And their thing was that they were not direct Force users, but they believed in the Force, as Chirrut says multiple times, and that's one of the reasons why I love his character. And because he has such this devout belief in the Force, it's what allowed him to guard this temple, even though he is blind. And that's what allowed him to take out all those stormtroopers in the beginning, because he is so in tune with his senses. And that is ultimately what, in my opinion, makes his sacrifice even more gut-wrenching, almost in K2SO's, because he's just going along within that blasting of stormtrooper fire, saying, the Force is with me, I believe in the Force, the Force is with me, I believe in the Force. And it's like he knows that the Force is going to will him to get to this master switch and flip it, so they can get the signal out and they can get the plans out, and it doesn't matter what happens to him, because whatever happens to him, the Force has already made that decision for him. So it's really cool to see, like, a new view that's not like the 100% Jedi belief in the Force.
Right, and just, I guess, to give him a little history on this galaxy that we all know and love, isn't that, and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that because now it's been a few years since the fall of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, and the galaxy is sort of rebuilding, and the Empire's grow has only gotten stronger.
Well, see, this is the thing about, like, if we're talking Jedi lore for a second, is the fact that Coruscant was the chief Jedi temple, but it was not nearly the only Jedi temple in the universe, because you got to remember, back in, like, the Knights of the Old Republic, if we're talking the older Republic, there were hundreds of Jedi temples throughout the entire universe, and this was just
Coruscant was the main one.
Coruscant was the main one, exactly.
The capital city of the Jedi
exactly.
Temple.
So Chirrut and Baze, what they did was they were in charge of protecting this one when Jedha was still an active Jedi training ground before the fall of the Republic, before the Empire comes in, and these guys still feel the need to continue guarding it. And the thing that I love about the dynamic between Chirrut and Baze is the fact that Chirrut is the spiritual one. He is very in tune with the Force. Whatever happens to him, the Force will guide it. Baze is the more practical one. And Baze, and the relationship between the two of them, I thought it was so well done, because Baze is the practical one. He's like, all weapons. He's just like, no, the Empire came in, they screwed us over, the Jedi are dead. What is the point of continuing to believe in the Force? But when Chirrut dies in his arm...
it didn't seem like Baze was... you can tell that he respected his friend and didn't want to sort of isolate him for having a very firm, strong belief in the Force, but you could tell that Baze was definitely a doubter, considering what had happened to the the Republic.
Right, exactly. He was able to emulate Han Solo without being Han Solo. He was able to be his own character. And the thing that I appreciated the most is at the end when Chirrut dies, the grenade goes off at the master switch right as soon as he's blowing the switch, and gets blown up and he dies. And Baze has his friend in his arms, and his friend is just like, "You believe, don't you?" He's like, "Yes,
yeah,
I believe
the classic,
in the Force."
Like hero, just go out and kill as many of them as you can before you die.
Exactly. And but ultimately, like you needed him holding Chirrut in his arms before he went out, because like it ended up completing their journey. And Bodhi too. You want to talk about Riz Ahmed's performance as Bodhi Rook? I thought
that was the Imperial pilot.
That was the Imperial pilot defector, the one who ended up getting Galen's message to Saw Gerrera, who we'll get into in a little bit here. Is the fact that he was a guy who could have just been like a throwaway part, but he ended up becoming such a tight-knit part of their group, of the 6 of them, and he ended up playing his part so well, and that made his death feel just as deserved, just as righteous, because when that grenade gets thrown in there and he's like, oh, like, because he just contributed in helping to fight the signal. And I thought Riz Ahmed, one of the more underrated actors right now, he's getting work though, he did a great job. He worked in this ensemble absolutely beautifully. So now, a couple more of the side characters before we wrap up here.
Well, hold on real quick. Galen, his name was?
Galen, Jin's father.
Galen. Yeah, I feel like he was a little underused.
Yes.
I wish we had more of him.
Right.
Because, honestly, he was the catalyst for this whole thing, and he was really important, and you got the feeling that he was important through Jin, but I don't think you got the feeling that he was important through, the two entities that are sort of fighting over him, because the way that not Tarkin, but the other one.
Oh, Krennic.
The way that Krennic lined up all the engineers and then just shot him, it was almost like he sent a message to this brilliant mind that, hey, you're disposable. And the Republic didn't, the Rebels.
The Rebels, yeah.
Wouldn't it make more sense to sort of capture him and try to convert that mind to your side, since he is so brilliant, as opposed to just take him out and kill him?
Well, this is the whole...
It just didn't seem like he was represented in the way where he's like, they make him seem like he's this really important, like genius character, but then everyone's more so trying to pick him off, as opposed to, it didn't, I don't know.
This is the argument that comes in with Galen, because I thought that in terms of Galen, Matt Mikkelsen's performance in the beginning, it was a little bit confusing in the beginning, because the thing that's established is that Galen and Krennic know each other. They go back. Galen used to be a very big part of the Empire. He was this genius technician.
And you had that flashback
scene. You had that flashback scene, but that flashback scene takes place after he leaves the Empire, because he wants to create this peaceful life for his family, because he doesn't want them to be under the Empire's thumb. Unfortunately, because he has this relationship with Krennic, and because Krennic is trying to get his seat next to the Emperor, and because he's trying to design this death weapon, he needs his friend who he knows has the expertise. So that's why in the beginning you needed that scene between Galen and Krennic. The thing about it though is that you say underused. I wouldn't say that Galen was underused necessarily. I would say more so that Galen's problem was that he ended up playing his part without actually needing to be there. Because the thing that I actually appreciated both about his part in the film and about Felicity Jones, this contributes to her performance as Jin, because Galen gets taken away from her when she's 10 years old, and then she is taken in by this rebel freedom fighter, Saw Gerrera, and raised her entire life. She hasn't seen her father in years, but when that hologram comes on, and Galen's talking to his daughter for the first time in years, it's absolutely heartbreaking. Because it's just like, she doesn't even need to say any words. She just goes down on her knees because she's like, she still loves him because it's her dad and she hasn't seen him in years. And Galen's part, I think, contributes to the film even more so because it's revealed that you are right. Krennic was trying to show that Krennic only kept him on for a little while because he was his friend, because Galen revealed in that hologram that after a while, the Empire didn't need him. So he could have either done one of two things. He could have just gone along with it, built the Death Star, given the Empire this massive death weapon that they could use to literally blow up planets that just didn't suit them. Or what could he do? He could play along and he could slightly sabotage it. And that one little part in A New Hope, that joke that has been a running gag for years now, it's like, oh, you gotta shoot two proton torpedoes into that tiny little thermal exhaust port. Galen built that on purpose. And when he reveals that, I thought that was a great twist. But he reveals that the thing is that because it's such a small opening, they don't know exactly where it is, which is why they need the entire technical readout of the Death Star plans in order to know where to fire, which is what ultimately sets up for the third act. So I appreciated his inclusion in the film, and it made his death when he died a touch more satisfying.
Okay, yeah, you're right, but correct me if I'm wrong here. that was the furthest elaboration we've had of the classic loophole in the Death Star, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they never really told us how that was created.
You're right.
They more so said that it was there, that
yes.
they had gotten the plans from Rebels.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that being said, I thought that was a cool nod, but then again, I just kind of feel like his screen time didn't really... We knew all that, and we could have gotten that out of the hologram, like you said. So it's either... I wish they found more of a deeper purpose for him to serve in this movie. Like, maybe that moment between him and his daughter could have gone on a little longer, and there could have been sort of like another reveal to help Rey in like the final fight, give her courage or something. Or Rey, I'm sorry, Jin.
Jin,
but,
yeah.
But I don't know. I loved his performance. I just wasn't 100% happy with what they had written for him. But you know, that's just me. Maybe I'm being too critical and picky because Star Wars is my favorite thing.
Exactly. Like I said, there's going to be characters that you like and there's going to be characters that you don't like. And I just thought that in terms of how he was included, because I knew for a fact, like out of all the characters you could have guaranteed that were going to die, Galen I knew was going to be 100% going to die.
That moment didn't really do it for me as much.
You're right. But here's the thing that I did appreciate about the moment is the fact of, even though the Empire shot all of his advisors, those were rebel bombs that went off because the Rebel Alliance found out that Jin and Cassian and the rest of them had gone there to get Galen, and they sent their ships, and they were the ones that blew up the port and injured him to the point that he died. So I thought that it was really cool how they provided that dichotomy there where it's like, oh, the rebels can cause just as much harm as the Empire does.
Right.
Which contributes to that whole argument of the gray characters are the best one, that not everyone is 100% good and 100% bad.
They did a lot of that in this movie. If you want to take a quick nod to the intro sequence where it was almost... kind of like a Middle Eastern conflict, like Black Hawk Down sort of like nod to the fact that this is real war, and when you have an empire and there are rebels, it's not like let's stand on one side of the battlefield and you stand on the other and shoot each other in a straight line. And it was like really gruesome, and it almost started off feeling like the new a new classic war film that's set in like the Middle East during the whole Desert Storm conflict, or what we just recently had in Iraq, and it was like really cool to see.
Yeah, exactly.
To see that depiction of the rebels as these freedom fighters, but sometimes freedom doesn't come easy.
Exactly.
Which was cool.
And that also contributes to what I liked the most about Cassian was in the beginning when he's talking to that guy, his informant, who first tells him about the Death Star and Galen, and that's what sends him off, is that Galen, Erso, has sent this fighter with the hologram to Saw, who is a friend, and they need Jin to pierce the barrier between Saw and the rebels because Saw's this crazy extremist freedom fighter who's got really weird methods that don't really mesh well with the rebels, and then Cassian shoots the guy because it's like, I can't let you go because if they get you, they'll make you talk. And he shoots him. And then later on, when he's talking to Jin, it's just be like, you've no idea what I've done. I've been fighting for this since I was 6. Not all of us have had the luxury of choosing which side whether we want to give a shit or not. And I love that.
That's probably my favorite quote from the movie.
I loved that because it just goes to show, like, Cassian he's not a black and white character. He's not fighting for the Rebel Alliance because he's like holy righteousness. He's fighting for it because this is the only life that he's ever known, because he knows that if he doesn't fight, he will die. And that's all there is to it, because he doesn't want to live a life of oppression, because he'd rather die a free man than live as an oppressed man. And I love that, because it's the struggle that each one of these characters, it's the first time where you really understand what the Alliance is fighting for.
Right, and to me, lines like that and scenes like the first sort of conflict between the Empire and those rebels that Jin and Cassian sort of walk into, those are scenes that I wish that Force Awakens had more of to set this modern tone of Star Wars.
Right.
Like, that sort of took away the fear maybe that they had back in the 70s and 80s when film was still a fairly new entity, and they were just sort of trying to create more of like a playful, like, mystical universe. The scenes like that sort of helped for me to evolve it into this is war just like any other war. Yeah, it's set in space with like, sort of like magical entity being the Force and whatnot, but it's still war. And that was, I hope that this movie can be sort of a push in the right direction for future directors to keep taking the realism in a movie that is so far away from that word was awesome.
Exactly. And this is honestly where my gripes for the biggest difference that I found between, like I said, we're running a little bit low on time, so we're not going to be able to talk as much about it a little bit more, so we're going to be wrapping up soon. But the 2 points that I wanted to hit on at first, number one being the main difference that I found between this film and The Force Awakens. I felt that because The Force Awakens had to reintroduce everybody back into the Star Wars universe, as well as setting up for all of these new things. It was able to focus more on its characters, also set you up to make you understand that these characters are going to be around for a while, but because they were so focused on characters and getting us into the universe, some of the things in terms of the story were sacrificed, like Starkiller Base. Let's face it, we all know it. It's a third Death Star. That is all it is, and that's ultimately, it felt like, and that's what ultimately what led to the third act. Like, the third act, we don't give a shit about the fight in the Death Star. Oh, Death Star, Starkiller Base, whatever the hell it is. We don't care. We care about the conflict. We care about Han Solo getting gutted by his son, and we care about Rey and Finn fighting off Kylo Ren, this new and upcoming Sith Lord. That's what we care
100%.
about. That is what we care about. But in this film, because it sets up from the beginning that this is a war film, that this is gritty, this has real stakes, and because the characters are used for the story versus in The Force Awakens, the story was used for the characters. Does that make sense? Like, because this one was such a tight, confined story, it has a beginning, a middle, and the end, and this is where it ends. The characters were used and incorporated into the story perfectly, and that's ultimately what made this a better film for me than Rogue One, because usually I love characters that I can follow.
The Force Awakens.
The Force Awakens, exactly. Because I love films that I can follow characters, but if it's sacrificed for the point of good, consistent storytelling, that's when it starts to waver a little bit.
This was a stronger ensemble piece. Because I feel like The Force Awakens, it starts off where you have Poe Dameron, and you have the new droid, and Han and Chewie are there. But really, towards the end of the movie, it's only about 3 characters. It's about Kylo Ren, it's about Rey, and it's about Finn. Whereas in this movie did such a good job of giving each of the main 6 their own moments, their own lore, their own backstory, without elaborating too much and moving the plot along. So all in all, I would say that this was a pretty... for young filmmakers, this is a great example of what an ensemble piece should do if it is a standalone film.
Right, exactly.
With that being said, I think we're at a good point to wrap it up.
Well, actually, because there was one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is the man himself, Vader. Oh my God. Oh man. So, first off, that first scene with Vader, I knew that Vader was going to be in this film, and I'm like, okay, how are they going to use him in this film? I was really intrigued. So that first scene in the film when Krennic goes to fly, so we can assume that that's Mustafar because they didn't have like the planet subtitles at the end, so we can assume that that's Mustafar. A lot of the theories
and things that I've read online say that they don't want to tell you that it was Mustafar because
they want to let the diehard Star Wars fans like assume that it's like, okay, this is where ultimately he was reborn as Darth Vader, because this is where Obi-Wan cut his hands and legs off and where he was burned deeply, and that's essentially where Anakin Skywalker died and he became Darth Vader.
Right.
So when he...
And essentially, the sources that I've read online basically have said that the Vader scenes, which were added in later on, were sort of like a nod to like future films in the new trilogy. Somehow it's going to tie in why they didn't tell you what planet that was.
Right.
But let's assume it's Mustafar.
We can assume for now that until they tell us otherwise, we'll assume that it's Mustafar, because this is the first scene with Krennic. I heard a lot of people criticize. I heard that they didn't love. I loved it because it showed Krennic. Yeah, okay. Because it showed like Krennic when he goes and he's talking to Darth Vader. It shows that like again the political machinations of the Empire. It shows that okay, I can't get past Tarkin, but I know there's another guy who has the Emperor's ear, a guy that might be more willing to listen because again he is the Emperor's right hand man, and he is much more loyal to the Emperor, because the biggest difference that I found between Tarkin and Vader is 100% loyal to the Emperor. He is the Emperor's dog. Tarkin, however, and this was set up more so because they included Tarkin in the later seasons of the Clone Wars, is that Tarkin has a little bit more of an agenda of his own. Yes, he is loyal to the Emperor, but at the same time, he doesn't want to fully listen to everything that he says because he wants to show that he can lead on his own. Versus Vader is 100% devoted to the Emperor. Whatever the Emperor's will is, that is Vader's will. And I really just enjoyed seeing how Krennic ultimately trying and failing against this dark Lord of the Sith. And that's another thing that I enjoyed the most about Vader, is that this is not prequels, Hayden Christensen in a suit with just James Earl Jones with a voice, Anakin Skywalker. This is Darth Vader. This is the most iconic villain character even in film history coming back. And
was it Hayden Christensen?
No, it wasn't. It was a different guy. They got two like body motion actors to do the voice. No, that was not Hayden Christensen in the suit.
It was John I forget his name, the original Vader.
David Prowse? No, it wasn't. It was not David Prowse who did the original Vader in the suit. It was a guy, British guy, I believe his name was Spencer Wildling.
I was talking about the voice.
Oh, the voice. No, that was James Earl Jones.
Yeah, exactly.
That was James Earl Jones with the voice. Because let's face it, James Earl Jones, he does the voice of him in Rebels. He's got such a distinct voice pattern as Vader, nobody else could do it. Nobody else could do it. Like, because he still voices him in Rebels.
Right.
But with that's animation, so they have a little bit more room to adjust. But I just thought the scene where he turns around and Krennic is like about to say something else. It's like, oh, but I'm still in command. And then you just see him begin to force choke. And you don't even need to see, you just see Vader's back. And he's just like, be careful not to choke on your aspirations. I know a lot of people had a problem with that, but I love the hell out of that line. But that's only build up for the end of the movie. So at the end of the movie, there's a scene where they just get off the planet Scarif, and where they just get off the planet Scarif, and the plans, they're getting away with the plans, right? And then you hear Tarkin say, oh, Lord Vader will handle a boarding party. And I'm like, okay, where is this gonna go? And the next thing you know, well, no, but that's the thing, is that you see those guys running along the hallway, and you see them, and all of a sudden they look back, and there's nothing, and it's just complete pitch black. And you see the red lightsaber go off, and I'm like, oh my god, it's gonna happen. Because the scene that happened next, this was a scene that diehard Star Wars fans have been waiting for years. Just see one dark hallway sequence of Vader going down and just slaughtering rebels, showing the true power of the dark side that he has at his power. He's just going around, he's like deflecting laser blasts. He literally force lifts a guy up to the ceiling, forgets that he's there, and then slices him down. Right. And the guy at the end of the hallway is like, help us, because the door's stuck and they can't get through. Take the plans, take them, because he knows they're not getting away from this guy.
That was really
intense. It was so intense. It was beautifully filmed, and it showed even more so just how pissed he was when Tantive 4 gets away to get to Tatooine. It was just such a great moment. In my opinion, it is not only my favorite Darth Vader moment that I've ever seen, it is, in my opinion, the best bit of Star Wars. That might be my number one favorite Star Wars moment, like, ever.
I definitely can't knock you for saying that. So I'll give him my quick, sort of like 10-cent, like, you know, short change version of Vader. From a cinematography standpoint, I really thought that door was going to bust open, but then that lightsaber turns on, and let me tell you, the theater that I was in, people screamed, people gasped, and I felt it.
It was like right out of a horror movie, too. It was like right out of an alien movie.
And
it was terrifying.
It was brutal. It was savage, but most importantly, I think it was the most honest depiction we've gotten of Vader. And this isn't to knock the old movies, because I just don't think they had the technology back then to make an action scene as smooth.
You're right.
So I still think they did an incredible job on the old school Vader, but I cannot wait for more modern Vader.
Oh my god.
And I usually hate the Disney-esque jokes, like in the first movie, the Poe Dameron, do I talk, do you talk?
Yeah, that was like such a Joss Whedon line.
I hate that. But the humor in this movie between K2 and Vader really wasn't bad, because it was quick.
Yeah.
It wasn't like...
It was quick.
I felt like it wasn't for the little kids that parents who dragged them to see that movie.
Right.
I felt like it was just more so like, oh, that was pretty funny, and it would make sense because, like, the dude was being so ignorant, and Vader doesn't take that. He doesn't play that
Vader
game.
does not take... He literally showed an empire. He was willing to force choke a guy to death for trying to apologize to him for letting Han and the Millennium Falcon get away. That's how intense Vader is. Vader does not take shit from anybody. Anybody.
With that being said, I think that a good note to close it on would be, we got the blue milk.
We got the blue milk. We got the blue milk. You're right. That was another reference.
I didn't see it my first watch through, but I did see it the second time.
I caught it the first time. I'm like, hey, it's the blue milk.
That was wonderful. And I will say, so that was our review of Force Awakens. We hope you guys like this. Dom, where can they find you?
All right, so you can find me on Twitter at Movie Nerd Review. You can also go to my website, movienerdreviews.com, where I post reviews daily, as well as news, trailer reactions, just pretty awesome movie stuff if you ever want to talk about, as well as my brand new YouTube channel that I'm just about to start, Movie Nerd TV, as well as right here on this podcast going forward. So now, Chris, where can they find you?
So I'm on all social media networking sites under one handle, Christian Evanko, and the name will be spelled out in the description of this video, wherever it would be posted. You can check out my music there, and this is sort of my first take into the world of film, but it is something that me and Dom have connected on, and something I've grown an interest for as I've realized that music is a really important part of film, as being in the case in Star Wars. So that being said, thank you for joining us. This was the Movie Nerd Podcast.
All right, this was a lot of fun, Chris. I had a lot of fun doing this, and we will see you guys next time.
Yes, thank you.